The saloon doors creaked, but it wasn't whiskey or a card game that drew the crowd's eyes that evening, it was her. The bride they all whispered about. The one who rode into Dust Creek in a rattling wagon, cheeks flushed from the sun, dress tugged too tight at the seams, sweat glistening at her brow. She was rounder than most, heavy enough to make the step creak when she came down. And the laughter, it spread like a disease the moment her boots touched dirt. Lord Almighty, the rancher ordered a heifer instead of a wife. One man guffawed. The bride lowered her eyes, clutched her small suitcase, and tried to pretend she couldn't hear the sting. But Dust Creek was merciless. Men spat tobacco and women smirked behind their parasols. A mail-order bride had always been a gamble, but nobody in town had expected this. What she didn't know was that the man she was promised to, a weather-worn cowboy named Luke McCready, was already standing at the edge of the street, watching with unreadable eyes. He didn't laugh. He didn't move. His hat brim shadowed his face, but there was something about the way his jaw clenched that silenced his hired hands who had started to chuckle. The bride's name was Clara. And Clara, though trembling inside, refused to cry. She had been mocked before, back east in the textile mills, where girls whispered about her size and suitors turned away. But the West had promised freedom. A husband. A home. Something worth the risk. Yet now, under the weight of their sneers, the promise felt like a lie. She stopped in front of Luke, not daring to meet his eyes. "Mr. McCready," she asked softly, her voice barely louder than the cicadas. "That's me," he said, slow drawl stretching the syllables. The crowd leaned in, hungry to see if he'd turn her away. Men nudged each other, betting on whether Luke would send her packing. Even his own ranch foreman muttered, "Hell, Luke, you can't marry that." Luke took his time, eyes moving from Clara's trembling hands to the dust swirling at her feet. Then, without a word, he took her suitcase, turned on his heel, and said, "Come on." The crowd gasped. She followed. The ride to his ranch was silent but sharp with tension. Every bump of the wagon reminded Clara of the stares, the cruel laughter. Luke didn't speak, but she caught him stealing glances. She braced herself for rejection once they reached his land. Maybe he'd find her a train ticket back east. Maybe he'd keep her as a cook instead of a wife. But fate turned differently. When they rolled into the McCready spread, a small girl ran out of the house, skirts flying, braids bouncing. She couldn't have been more than 8. Her blue eyes lit up when she saw Clara. "Daddy, is this her?" she cried. Luke stopped the horses. Clara froze, unsure what to say. The little girl marched right up, stared up at Clara with the wide-eyed honesty only children own, and then whispered the words that split the tension in two. "She is pretty, Daddy." Clara blinked. For the first time in years, someone had said it like they meant it. The child's name was Annie. She took Clara's hand and tugged her toward the house, ignoring the dust, the sweat, the tight seams. "You're my new mama, right? I always wanted one. Daddy said you were coming." Luke said nothing, only carried Clara's case inside. But something shifted in him at Annie's words. The harsh set of his jaw softened. He hadn't lied to the town, he had sent for a bride. And now here she stood, carrying her own scars just like him. But Dust Creek wasn't finished. The rumors spread faster than wildfire. Luke married a hog. The McCready bride'll break the bed. Bet he regrets it already. Every trip into town became a gauntlet for Clara. Laughter, whispers, eyes darting to her waistline. She held Annie's hand tighter each time, pretending it didn't cut her, but inside, she bled. Yet the ranch was different. The land didn't laugh at her. The cattle didn't sneer. And Annie, oh, Annie filled the house with joy, asking Clara to braid her hair, tell her stories, sing her to sleep. Slowly, the walls Clara had built around her heart began to crack. She even caught Luke watching her once, when she was teaching Annie to knead bread. His eyes lingered a little too long, as though he were seeing more than he had before. But the West always tested strength. One blistering afternoon, while Luke and his men were driving cattle, riders came tearing up the lane. Clara rushed outside, Annie clutching her skirts. It was the foreman, face pale beneath the dust. "Bandits," he rasped. "They're comin'. They'll take the herd, and maybe worse." Clara's blood chilled. Dust Creek had always whispered about outlaws, but now they were real. The men rode hard to gather rifles, leaving Clara and Annie alone in the house. She barred the door, lit a lamp, and clutched the shotgun Luke had left behind. Her hands shook. She wasn't a fighter. She wasn't strong like the others. Or so she thought. The bandits came like a storm, hooves pounding, voices shouting. Bullets shattered windows. Annie screamed. Clara pressed her daughter close and fired through the cracks, the recoil bruising her shoulder. She missed once, twice, but the third shot hit, and one outlaw tumbled from his horse. They cursed, they circled, they tried to smoke her out, but Clara held the line. Fear burned into steel. She fought for the ranch, for Annie, for the man who had taken her suitcase without a word. Hours later, when Luke and his men returned, they found the yard littered with bodies and the rest of the gang fleeing into the hills. Clara stood in the doorway, hair wild, dress torn, shotgun still hot in her hands. Annie clung to her, eyes wide not with fear, but pride. "Daddy, Mama's brave," she said softly. Luke dismounted slowly, gaze locked on Clara. No man in town would laugh at her now. Not after this. But Dust Creek still tried. When word spread, the saloon jeers turned sharper. "Lucky shot," they sneered. "Still ain't fit for a cowboy's wife." Clara walked past them with her chin high, Annie's hand in hers. Luke walked beside her, silent but solid, daring anyone to spit again. Weeks turned to months. The land was hard, but so was Clara. She grew stronger with each sunrise, working cattle, patching fences, tending Annie. She laughed more. She sang. And one evening, as the sun bled gold across the prairie, Luke finally spoke what he'd kept buried. "I don't care what Dust Creek says," he told her, voice rough, eyes steady. "You're my wife. You're the only woman I'll ride beside." Tears burned Clara's eyes. She remembered the first day, the laughter, the shame. And then Annie's voice, cutting through it all. "She is pretty, Daddy." The town never stopped gossiping, but it no longer mattered. Because in that ranch house, with the prairie wind rattling the windows and Annie's laughter echoing through the halls, Clara had found what no one could mock away. Not beauty in the mirror, but the kind a child sees when she looks at you with love. And Luke, hardened cowboy, knew Dust Creek had it wrong. He hadn't ordered a bride out of desperation. He had found a woman of iron, with fire enough to guard his home and tenderness enough to heal his heart. The obese bride they laughed off had become the legend of Dust Creek. And every time Annie looked up, her voice still rang true, simple and pure as the prairie sky.